It's time to get the story behind the story. Interviews with newsmakers, news breakers, and Vermonters making a difference. WCAX presents 802 News with Mark Johnson. Here's Mark.
Aly Richards is running for governor. The former head of Let's Grow Kids says she's ready to apply the same strategic thinking that resulted in a major expansion in child care services to the pressing problems of today: rising education costs, insufficient affordable housing, and a costly healthcare system. In this edition of 802 News, Richards says she expects Republican Governor Phil Scott will run again. "Thank you for your service," she says, "but it's time for someone else to lead the state." The mother of twins who grew up in Newbury, the 40-year-old Richards will face at least one opponent in the Democratic primary, economist Amanda Jannou. We'll begin our discussion with Richards in a moment. First, a word from our sponsor, Red Hen Baking Company. Change is happening at Red Hen Baking Company. Later this year, Red Hen Cafe will be moving to a new location in Middlesex, and in the meantime, they'll be opening a cafe in Montpelier, something customers have long requested. The quality, of course, will remain the same, with only the best of the best ingredients used in their breads, pastries, soups, and sandwiches. Owners Randy and Eliza Kane are excited about all the changes, and know you will be too. Let's start in Newbury. Tell me about growing up in Newbury.
My parents, we chose to come to Vermont when I was 3 because my parents thought Vermont was the best place to raise a family, and they were right, Mark. Growing in Newbury was about what you'd imagine. Dirt road, Newbury Elementary School, beautiful common, general store, post office. That's it. And it was an amazing community, incredible. And then I went to Oxbow High School. My dad was my teacher, AP History and AP English,
Wow.
which is
Okay.
funny. I promise you, he did not cut me any slack. Actually, it's funny. We just talked about history morning, noon, and night in the car ride at dinner, which I actually am quite grateful for. I'm a huge fan and student of American history to this day. It grounds me in a lot, especially thinking now about politics here. So, it's interesting. When I was 15, Howard Dean appointed me to the State Board of Education as a student member, youngest ever student member. It had just passed a few years earlier. Actually, a wonderful local rep, Al Stevens, who lost, his job after civil unions there in the State House. I shadowed him in 8th grade, and they were debating whether to put a student on the state board. And he said, "Look, let's listen to this debate because I think we will pass this, and you will do this." 3 years later, I was old enough, I applied, and Governor Dean appointed me, and it was amazing. I'll just say 2 things. You asked about my childhood. I learned some interesting lessons. The Valley News came to the library at Oxbow High School and interviewed me, and then the next day, someone wrote a column, poor Elijah had this column, and said, "Who is this 15-year-old girl? Can't even drive herself to the meetings. How dare we put her on the State Board of Education?" So I first mudslinging, Mark, at a ripe age of 15. Wow. And it really was helpful. It was instructional, and it got the thickness of my skin started to grow. And but the other thing was, I thought, well, okay, maybe he's got a point. These adults probably have it under control. So I get to the room, and guess what? The adults did not have it under control. And that was very instructional for me. These aspirational models, you see yourself sitting at a table, you grow your voice, you see you have something to add. Because I was a student, and this was State Board of Ed, the matter at hand was our education system, my presence as the human most close to the thing we were debating changed the conversation in a fundamental way. I saw it happen, and that was my foray into, understand that you have a perspective that's valuable.
Speaking of history, I looked, and you have to go back to Dean Davis to find somebody who became governor who didn't hold a statewide office and serve in the legislature.
Well, I love to hear that because then I'm following very good footsteps with Dean Davis. That's a pragmatic, very effective governor.
Good answer. But why does that not matter?
Look, I think in this moment, the skills that, for example, someone like I bring and a perspective that I bring is critical. There's a couple things. I will hit the ground running day one because of my background. Grew up in Vermont. Basically, I was joking with you earlier, didn't realize I'd been training for this job since I was 5. The thing I like to do the most is talk to Vermonters, to really listen and understand. And I did that my entire life. So I feel so energized jumping into this because honestly, I think, my trajectory like many of my peers, after I graduated from Oxbow, I went out of state hoping to change the world and going to the center of it to change the world. So I found myself working on Barack Obama's first presidential campaigns, where I met my husband. And I thought we were going to just absolutely bring together the country over the things that had been rupturing us from the beginning. And you know that did not happen. What I found, though, Mark, was I was going to bang my head against the wall in D.C. I wasn't going to solve everything from the center. People who didn't agree with each other anymore didn't speak to each other anymore in 2008. They didn't go to the same establishments. They didn't walk the same side of the street. I mean, really deep entrenchment. I knew enough to know that's not how change happens. So I ran home to Vermont and I imported my husband with me. And both of us are the humans that need to roll up our sleeves and get stuff done. So I started working for the governor. And my job was to talk to Vermonters and really understand all kinds. At the end of the day, if we disagreed, we could get a beer. That is why we can do things in Vermont. It's a different theory. It's like, let's prove by example. So basically, I've seen this job so up close and personal, working in the center of it. And then I just spent the last 10 years deeply working to solve a crisis, a systemic crisis in childcare that has dogged us. And I had to pull every lever of state government without being in charge of it. So understanding how to work with the legislature and the administration from the outside and really knowing the machinery of state government. So for me, Mark, it's about, do you understand the machinery of state government? And I do. I've worked something through it from the beginning to the actual ground result. And so at the end of the day, look, what I would say is what's happening right now in Vermont isn't working. So it is time for a new approach. When I took my head up from the 10 years of childcare, what did I find? What you see, what everybody sees. Every other measure in Vermont is in crisis. That's the one area of growth we see in childcare. Let's take that same approach to housing and healthcare, So I guess that's my long-winded answer. Got a little bit of my bio in there too, because it is what motivates me, Mark.
Governor Shumlin, you're talking about.
Correct. And look, I didn't know him at all when I heard, that he was running for governor. In fact, we helped Barack Obama from the political side do political. Both my husband and I were promoted to political fundraising in D.C. Neither of us believed we should have money in politics like this. Citizens United is such a seed of absolute destruction in our democracy. And so we were in the room with the president and the first lady, these amazing high octane people we were meeting as young 20-somethings. And we said, we can't get out of bed every morning. We don't believe in what we are doing with the fundraising side. And so I heard about, and also we raised all this money for the midterms and we lost everything in that backlash, right? Which showed a lot of trends, scary trends in our society, that backlash against President Obama in the first midterm. So I heard about this one bright spot, a governor in Vermont who was talking about early childhood education, who was talking about single-payer healthcare, who was talking about, he was the first politician to use the phrase climate change in a public address in 2010. That should terrify us. So that's, I came home and worked for him when he started this administration.
Today, we're talking here in late April. Today, the state of Vermont, a law went into effect that allows people to sue federal workers, officials who are engaged in enforcing immigration rules. This went through without Governor Scott's signature, but became law. Would you have signed that bill?
Gosh, I haven't followed the details of that bill enough to answer that question, Mark. I'm certainly not going to be in a position of putting my opinion out when it's not informed. But I'll say from a value statement, we have to protect our communities. There are nefarious things at play here, from the federal government in many levels, dysfunction, all the way to very targeted and planned, attacks that are coming through policy, through withholding of funding, obviously through ICE. So I think we need to strike a balance of not poking the bear unnecessarily. We're a vulnerable small state that relies on a lot of federal funding, but we've got to fight for what's right. And there's a lot of objective right and wrong emerging from the federal action. So just from a value perspective, how I approach that. But again, specifics of the bill, I just don't want to say without knowing more.
Well, this also comes on the heels of this protest that happened in March here in South Burlington on Dorset Street. Of course. And there were 6 people that were arrested in the course of this. and the Chittenden County State's Attorney has chosen to dismiss the charges on 3, sent 3 people to restorative justice programs. And there's been some backlash on that, including from Governor Scott.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to her decision?
Well, it goes back upstream. When I was first considering whether or not, when I was being asked to consider, jumping into this race, and early this year, it's been not much time, Minnesota was on fire, okay? And part of my motivation for jumping in, Mark, was put me in, coach. This is coming to our doorstep tomorrow. We've got to be prepared. And my first instinct was train the protesters, train the Vermont State Police. These are layered, complicated things. And it changes based on what kind of a warrant. It changes based on who's involved. It changes, is this a felony or a misdemeanor? If you're a teacher protesting, blocking a door, are you going to lose your job because the type of warrant means it's a federal felony? So I would have trained the protesters and the Vermont State Police. Education is power. There's so many complicated factors here, but education is power in this regard. I would have had them, right away training together so people know what to expect walking in, so we can be more of a united front. Frankly, it's so complicated, and then it avoids these downstream pointing of the finger. Will you not? Should we not? Everyone's putting their values on these sort of like logistics at the end of it. I wish we could have gotten ahead of it.
Well, if elected governor, you'll be in charge of many agencies, including the Vermont State Police. But Governor Scott was very critical of Sarah George's decision not to move forward on these prosecutions. Yeah. What's your view?
Again, look, I'm not in the position yet, so I don't want to take a lot of hypotheticals.
Well, it's not a hypothetical. It happened.
Yeah. Well, I think that protesters have the right to do what they're doing, and we have to make sure that it's nonviolent. So, I think that it's a balance. And, I don't have all the details the way Sarah George has, at her hands. What I would have done differently, by the way, though, was been more communicative and transparent, from the governor's office. Everyone in Vermont was on, eggshells, wondering what was happening, wondering what the response was. And there was a press release. I would have had a press conference. I would have had a conversation. I would have had a lot more communication after the event.
What's your view on the ICE enforcement efforts?
I got to honestly start by giving gratitude to the judges of Vermont. It's really, it's showing it matters, because we have folks who are, these are our neighbors, Mark. These are Vermonters. By all means, take a harder view of immigration. Close the borders, fine. But these humans here are Vermonters, and they're our neighbors, and we need them to grow our communities and shape our communities, and that's what they are doing. So I think it's absolutely wild that we have to live in fear here in our communities, thinking that a masked force is going to come and we don't know what's right, we don't know what's wrong. Again, like the protesters at Dorset Street were asking about warrants, and are they real, and can we see them? This is not America. This is not America. So I have to again thank our judges who are really, and thank the Immigration Defense Fund, and thank the folks, when I feel so powerless, Mark, especially before I even jumped into this, I look for the levers. And for me, the Immigration Defense Fund is a great one. Fund the folks who can represent our neighbors in the face of, in most cases, absolutely frivolous action.
You say you would thank the judges. Would you also thank the state police? The head of the state police said, were they not to be there would have been likely fatalities like in Minneapolis.
It's hard to say. I wish there had been more communication between the parties, local, state police, and ICE as much as you possibly can. But since that's out of our control, I'd love to see more communication between all parties up front. The protest, the protesters and the state police and the local law enforcement. But, it's hard to say what would have happened or would have not happened. The Vermont State Police is an incredible force. I think one of the best in the country. That's why I feel like we owe it to them to support their preparation. This is unprecedented what we're seeing, incredibly complex. And I think that transparency and that training is the key.
Well, I think they would argue that they had been trained to deal with this. And I think the question is, based on what happened, and you had 6 people arrested, 3 of them by the Vermont State Police, 3 by the locals, would you back that up?
Honestly, this is a very in-depth, complicated situation. And that's where I have to stick with what I'm saying about like the values and the approach, because I don't have all the information. I don't have all the details.
Let's talk about Let's Grow Kids. I mean, this is really your signature program. You ran this for 10 years. And the result of it was in 2023, there was a payroll tax that was instituted that has done some incredible work in terms of expanding the not only the opportunities, but the access to it, largely by lowering the cost. How was that program successful into coming into being?
That's a great question. And it was
one you probably know a lot about.
I do. Well, it was 10 years of my life. So let's see. We ran a movement, Mark, 40,000 Vermonters from all walks of life. We also understood what were the gaps and we filled them, and there were many. So we really took a full court press and we put a deadline and said, it is our mission to have high quality affordable childcare by 2025. And we kept that collective goal. We understood if it was real. We renewed the goal many times over, and with humans that were most impacted, grew the movement of 40,000 people. And we provided sort of the communication of who's most impacted: parents, early childhood educators, businesses, put them in the driver's seat. We then, sort of did the value proposition. What's wrong? Let's study it. Let's understand it deeply. What's the solution? Why do we know it's going to work? What's the data? And then we moved it again through the machinery of state government. But we really took an interesting, sort of approach: people, policy, programs. Build the political will when you're going to do something so huge to make it a real Vermont conversation. Understand the policy in depth, informed by people on the ground, so we know the implementation will work. And the program piece is, I think, the one people don't really understand. We were on the ground readying the system for investment, understanding the bright spots, the challenges, to inform the policy, but also to ready the infrastructure, build some economies of scale, support the leadership. So we took that full court press and we popped a deadline on it, because nothing happens in human nature without the deadline. So true, by the way. What a gift for me as a CEO for 10 years, the duration of the campaign, to internally have the deadline. It kept us focused. Are we doing good work? Great. Are we on track to win by 2025? No, not good enough. How do we pivot? How do we continue to stay nimble? And then externally, it put the feet to the fire. So we provided sort of like whatever it takes approach to build the political will, to get Vermonters engaged in the conversation, to say, this is an important enough goal. The trade-offs are worth it. You mentioned the payroll tax. So what happened? We passed the most significant childcare bill in the country in 2023, and it's working as we hoped. I will point to the business community as a key factor. The grassroots movement, hugely critical. Early childhood educators, leaders in the driver's seat, hugely critical. This deadline, all the above. Plain politics. You don't change policy without politics. We had a 501c4, right? All these things. But the business leadership, I've been preaching this across the country, because if we want to see change here, this is the X factor. When we studied the issue enough, we realized it's a business model that is broken. Parents can't afford to pay more. Early educators cannot afford to make less. Why? There's not enough money to provide the service, okay? And so something's got to give. You need the public investment, which is great because it's a tangible solution. It's terrible because we're talking about money. So basically, we came together as a community and said, we understand the goal is important enough. We understand the return on investment. So we understand the trade-off. And that's what led us to be able to pass a 0.44% novel payroll tax. 75% employer, the rest is employee, but the employer may pick up the whole amount, and many are. So what we're seeing on the ground, Mark, over 5,000 Vermonters are having life-changing amount of savings on their childcare bills, and growing every day. The folks who are eligible, you make $200,000 as a family of 4, you get tuition assistance, for childcare now. That's the highest of any place in the country. And then we have 100 new childcare businesses have opened. Half of them are family childcare homes, critical for rural Vermont and a part of the system. You have 2,000 new childcare spaces all around Vermont. I mean, Guildhall, Vermont has its first childcare. It's never had one before, ever in history, So it's, and then the wages of early educators growing up. And so people can find and afford childcare, people going back into the workforce, right? People literally saying they're having that second or third kid and their family's complete. I mean, this is something to pause on. the cold hard capitalist case is real. The return on investment is real. And decisions about whether to have children seem pretty metaphysical, seem pretty meaningful. And you're making them or not based on sort of a logistical societal challenge that we have not gotten ahead of, right? So it's one of these things that's amazing to me. And I think the return on investment, we have to keep understanding exactly what it is, because it's a growth. We're putting us into a growth cycle here on childcare when we need to focus whatever it takes on demographics, because that's what's strangling so many of our other systems.
What would you apply from that effort towards education reform?
Everything, and housing and healthcare. My big proposition here is the approach. Okay. I don't have all the answers personally, and I actually think it's dangerous to think you might, from a leader. I think what we need to do is understand the interconnectedness of all these things. For example, in a statewide economic development plan, which we do not have, when you push the toothpaste tube, where does it come out and why? And the ability to sort of put the vision out there. We put a North Star out there, Mark, and then we sort of said, now what are the milestones to it? What are the value propositions? What are the trade-offs? What's the policy path? We need that plan on education. We need that plan on housing and on healthcare. And it's got to come from the top. And when you have a vision, then what do? You delegate to those that understand it the most, really good leaders, but you cheerlead, you beat the drum until you have finished it and you're seeing the result on the ground. So many elements of what I just said, I think we're not seeing. You're not seeing the vision, the strategic plan. You're not putting the full weight of our staff, in this case, I would say administration officials, aligned towards the top priorities. And that's why, housing, healthcare, education, these are the root causes of everything else we care about. So they deserve our priority. And then the stakeholder engagement. It's not a check the box perfunctory thing.
You don't think that's happened with education? I mean, how long has this state studied education reform? And now we're at a point where we're either first or second in the country in terms of per pupil cost.
Yeah.
I mean, with all due respect, what you're suggesting sounds like more study, more study, more study.
No, it's not study. It's an action plan. So I would ask you, though.
Then what's the North Star that you're talking about?
The North Star is cost containment. We lost 25,000 kids, and we've not changed. Cost containment, we have the highest per pupil spending for admin cost, okay? And it's educational opportunity. If you're graduating with 5 kids in your class, are you getting what you need? There are 2 North Stars. We agree. But I'd ask you back. We've studied education reform for so long. Have you ever heard anyone articulate a vision or a pathway, an actionable pathway with data, about how we get from point A to point B?
Well, there have been a couple of proposals right now put out on the table. One is to consolidate school districts into a fewer number. Clearly, that's going to result in closing down schools. Mm-hmm. Would you support Act 73 as it stands today?
Well, that's the other thing. So what's happening in reaction to that proposal? Communities are happy and lined up and realizing they're compromising, putting something out there, seeing the trade-offs and are okay because they know what the end goal is. No, communities are being torn apart. Everywhere I go, I have a different conversation about education. People are centering different things. People have ulterior motives, like about whether they think private schools or independent schools are good or bad or whatever, that they're using as their key driver for the conversation. We're not having an objective conversation together about what's happening. So for me, no, I actually think what we're doing right now is it's a communication, it's a process that's torn our communities apart. And is it going to lead to anything? That's the other thing. We've gone down this road before, and the result has not happened. I lost sleep on childcare, not whether we were going to be able to get the revenue. I just knew at the end of the day we could do that. I lost sleep because I wasn't sure it was going to work on the ground. That's the most important thing. There's no follow through. So for me, the agency of education needs to be, and I don't believe it is, a full-time navigator support to these districts as their number one job. Here's the district map. Here's all the districts that look the same. Here are the ones that look different. Let's make them all the same so that we can decide where the merging makes sense. It's like a mixed delivery system right now of if you've seen one district, you've seen one district. So they're not organized. That's a simple process. How about some data to these communities? Mark, I go into communities thinking they're going to say, don't close my school. And what they say is, we know we have to close this school. We would prefer not to be bullied, about it, so we can have a calm conversation about how it's going to look. And honestly, it'd be nice if we had a little modeling that said we'd actually save money if we made the hard decision. We don't have any of that. And maybe a little bit of money to turn it into a community center if we do close it. So see, I hope you don't think this is a cop-out when I'm going back to approach, because that to me is the success of the result, is the approach. And so I don't think 5 community meetings selling a plan is community engagement. And that's what happened in the lead up to this.
Can you close schools voluntarily?
Oh gosh, people in Vermont are not against making hard choices. I really don't believe that. I think some schools will close, and they should. I think the question is how. Are we closing the right ones? Also elementary schools versus high schools, I think we have a real conversation to have. In some cases, smaller elementary schools may be okay and provide educational opportunity, and they're the heart of the town. But for high school, I think it's more objective. We understand if you can't offer AP, if you can't offer enrichment, if you can't offer languages, no, we're not doing right by our kids. So that's another conversation that I think has been sort of adulterated in so many ways. So, I think a forced merger in this environment where we've not done the work to create a North Star and an instruction manual is not going to be successful. Because the trust is lost, Mark. I mean, that's the other thing. I know enough about basic change management to know the way this is unfolding. Even if it's good objectively in some places, it's not going to work because there's no buy-in.
But if costs are going up, and as well as I do that people are complaining about how high their property taxes are, why hasn't it already happened?
It's such a great question. I see we're playing a game of whack-a-mole here. And when you do that, people are fearful and they go into their corners. That's what I see. So I see in the debate, everyone has decided the thing they care the most about. They've taken it to their corner and they're protecting it. When you actually have a vision and you say, well, this is where we're going, and build some trust that you're actually going to get there. It's not going to be a mess. You're not going to fall off the wagon on the way. You're more willing to come to the table and see the trade-off, to either close the school or, to downsize the administration. I think the idea of district consolidation from you don't have to have your own transportation, scheduler. You don't have to have your own curriculum coordinator. Those are things that we really can get ourselves around if we have a quick conversation with the North Star and the vision, and we show why it will make a difference. It will reduce costs. I want to say, though, do we need to do this 100%? We're the one state in the country without a foundation formula. Okay, so the foundation formula is how you do control the costs, but you must make sure it's the right foundation formula.
Well, that's a key part of Act 73 as
Exactly.
It's been proposed.
But without efficient delivery, it will not work, right? That's the thing. You have to pair the foundation formula with efficiencies in the school delivery. From an admin, side to a school, side. And then you have to make sure that there's transitional understanding what the transition looks like when you move from today to that. And then you make sure you have those transitional supports in place. So it's very important the pieces all fit together. And I don't see that level of specific vision from the executive branch that would help guide the legislative conversation.
At the end of the day, with Let's Grow Kids, you wanted more child care centers, easier access to it. At the end of the education reform discussion, are there fewer schools?
I bet there are. Yes. But are they the right ones? And has the community decided they're going to do a tough thing because it's the right thing to do? It's going to save money and it's going to be better for the kids with a little bit of support, from the friendly state government that can actually help solve problems instead of sort of create chaos.
But here's the thing, and I think that this is human nature. Everybody wants to see fewer schools, but don't close my school. Mm-hmm. How do you get past that?
I'm not hearing that. Honestly, truthfully, in communities, people are not saying that to me. They're saying, gosh, we've got to close this school. Help us make the case. Help us discuss the trade-off and the return on investment like we did with childcare so we can bring the community together around it instead of everybody coming to the table saying, I'm scared. I went to this school. I think we're going down the wrong path because of X, Y, Z. Everyone has something else they're bringing to to the debate. I don't think we're having that very, like you said, the North Star conversation helps a community through the process.
That's encouraging to hear that that isn't the case.
Really, it's not. I've been to 14 counties in 14 days. I just launched 3 weeks ago. So also, I want to be really clear. I have a lot of thoughts, as you can already tell here, about specific policies and very much a thought about a different approach. I'm leaving room on purpose to listen to Vermonters, right now. And again, as I said, every county in 14 days, what you will see from me in my campaign is a rollout of very specific, the approach, the framework, that stuff is pretty baked. That's my motivation for running. But very specific policies, but also the humans who will be sort of my advisors and hopefully my cabinet secretaries as this campaign rolls on. But I am leaving some space so early to really do the listening, frankly. I was surprised by some things, Mark, including communities saying, you come in here thinking we're going to say, no, don't close my school. We're having a very nuanced conversation here about it. We'd like a little bit of support.
Let me just go back for a moment to Let's Grow Kids. And I hope this isn't an impolite, impolitic question.
Can't imagine what it might be.
Well, for about half the time you were doing it, your salary was 200 plus.
Yeah.
Educate me. Why is that?
Thank you for asking the question. It's something I think about all the time. I'm going to just be really honest with you. So I came back to Vermont. So I grew up, for example, with a one public high school salary as my family in Vermont. And I came back to Vermont to work for the governor for $27,000 a year. Okay. So I was recruited to run Let's Grow Kids at $150,000 a year. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And it was lower than the starting salary for the national search that they had just done and decided they wanted me as their leader because they'd seen me in action. So because I was young and because I was an house person. And so very equivalent to other larger nonprofits in Vermont. Actually, I know that's odd because, often nonprofits have the low salary. So I didn't set the salary. The board set the salary, and it was incredibly generous. And over the years, I tried to, frankly, turn down a couple raises. The board wanted to keep me, and they kept me for 10 years. And the board and, the folks involved, Let's Grow Kids, the donors, a lot of them were from the business community, venture capitalists and others who have very specific tactics and values about talent recruitment and retention. And so it was out of my hands, Mark. I was incredibly I'm not motivated by the money, and I tried to turn down those raises each time. I gave back generously to Let's Grow Kids as a donor, but it is what it is, and I'm happy to be transparent about it. It's tough because we were fighting for wages in early child education. So I don't think it's a impolite question. I think transparency is critical. And look, Mark, I was able to buy a house because of it. My family has a home, and this is the other thing that's insane. Making such a generous salary, paying for childcare, buying a house, we weren't exactly socking much away, which just shows how absolutely critical the affordability crisis is in the state of Vermont.
Let's go to another area that you've been involved in too, which is are you still a trustee at the University of Vermont Medical Center?
I've resigned to run.
Okay, because I was going to say, I saw that you were, and then I looked it up yesterday or the day before.
Poof, I was gone.
You disappeared.
I resigned from all of my jobs and boards before I launched.
Healthcare is obviously an area that's been of great concern to Vermonters, double-digit increases in healthcare premiums. What's your approach going to be on this, another just huge critical issue?
It's critical. Let me tell you why I was on the board in the first place. So I have twins, identical twin boys. They're 7.5. I had them while I was at Let's Grow Kids because I took Let's Grow Kids very seriously and literally.
Wow.
Well, it was my job and it became my life.
I'm just thinking of the energy in your house.
Look, Mark, you want something done, ask a twin mom. Ask a busy person. That's real. It was amazing. Oh my gosh, my kids, Bo and Wes, they are hilarious. They're great. You should have them in some time. They really entertain your
next
viewers.
Podcast.
They got a lot to say. So they're little philosophers too. It's amazing. And they're literally learning how to run a campaign in the other room here. It's really amazing to watch. I was pregnant with them. Great pregnancy because it was a high risk pregnancy for a couple of reasons. They were identical, so they shared a placenta. You have an overshare line here on the podcast. So I could see Central Vermont Medical from my house. I had to go up to UVMMC for my care, and I got world-class care the whole time. I was totally fine. One of those humans that enjoyed it because I thought, well, twins, this is probably my one shot. The 33 weeks, I found out that I had HELLP syndrome, which is a very dangerous, fatal preeclampsia. And so they rushed me in for an emergency C-section at 33 weeks, and they saved my life. They saved the baby's lives. They were in the NICU for 3 weeks. They were 4 pounds each, and all they needed to do was grow. Everything else was great. And to be in the NICU, no mom or anyone expects to have a start to their family like that. But my goodness, the silver lining was a whole team of medical professionals teaching you how to become a parent. That's not such a bad thing. I think we could all use that. So I watched this very complex city function around me for 3 weeks, sitting there with the kids. And while I was there, Aly Stickney and Jesse Bridges called and said, we would like you to be on the board of UVM Medical Center. I was like, your timing is impeccable. Mm-hmm. You just saved my life, my kids' lives. I'm so intellectually intrigued by seeing the functionality of this complex system. I said, of course, I'd love to give back. I joined the board, and at that point, the network had already sort of made the decision to take a lot of the fiduciary responsibility from the local boards. And so the first thing was, we didn't have a lot of say. And the second thing was, I became despondent on that board, Mark. I got more of an up-close look, and every societal problem in the world comes home to roost in the hospital, in the emergency room, more specifically. Mental health crisis, housing crisis, lack of housing, lack of treatment facilities.
Drug abuse.
Oh, and then add a pandemic, a cyber attack, you name it. So, and all the levers of change are out of our reach. Federal government, we saw what happened with single payer, couldn't do it as little old Vermont, don't have enough humans. So really, really despair, frankly. Then I realized, I became the vice chair a couple of years ago and got, with Jesse Bridges, and I got really much more steeped in a lot of the detail and realized all that is true, but there are levers that we can reach that we must pull immediately because we have to do everything right to at least have a prayer of a functioning system. And one of those things was UVMMC and the health network have to be a trusted partner to use the power against the common enemy. Access and affordability, namely right now affordability. And so I think with Steve Loeffler's leadership, which is sort of the last sort of parting gift before I resigned here of supporting a leadership transition to have Dr. Loeffler be there, critical. What can a volunteer board member do? Get a great leader and support them. And so Steve at the helm of the system, really coming to the table with his expertise for a full comprehensive look at healthcare in Vermont with partner hospitals, with the state, the Green Mountain Care Board. This is what we need. So we're moving in some right directions. I'm actually somewhat optimistic from that perspective. That being said, look, we have another one on it, like education, hard decisions, Mark. We have to sprint, like our lives depend on it, because they do, to get the hospitals collaborating outside of the network, all the hospitals. And you can't do it alone. Literally, there are antitrust laws. You can't do it alone. You have to have AHS in the room. We should have done this many years ago. We had that Oliver Wyman report that laid it out.
Yep.
Then we had a consultant. They didn't like the consultant. They changed the consultant. They're starting the new one. I'm sorry, not good enough. 2 years ago, should have had the best facilitator in the world with all those hospitals doing a sprint. Who's doing hips? Who's doing feet? Why and how? This is the only way we are going to survive, Mark. They're hard conversations, but when you lay out the plan and the vision and the trade-off of bankrupt hospitals, if we don't do it, this is the work of government. This is how our government must step up. So it's a huge motivation for me running. There are things we can do right away. They won't turn the needle, but they will help with efficiencies. Keep these incredibly important hospitals open. You don't lose those jobs. You don't use those ERs. We also have $195 million that fell in our laps. And it's not great circumstances. It's because this president, cut Medicaid, said, ooh, people are really going to be mad at me for that. Here's a bunch of block grants. Not great. But look, we got $195 million for the state of Vermont. Have we heard about it? You know what I mean? Like we need to focus up with alacrity. Who are the humans that are going to help us spend that money on time effectively, because that doesn't fall from the sky all the time. And there are things we could do now with the upfront investment that would absolutely help us change the way we deliver healthcare.
So you see the hospital system in Vermont, 13 hospitals, 14 hospitals, remind me.
I don't even know the number at the moment.
And specializing. Sounds like what you're saying.
It's called places, intelligence centers, focus centers. Absolutely, Mark. And they can then decide what are the basic healthcare needs every hospital has to have. Let's decide on those. Let's make sure that they're supported to do those. The emergency room stays open and they're specializing. And this happens around the country to great effect. We're not reinventing the wheel here.
Do you see hospitals closing?
Hopefully not many. I think that the Oliver Wyman report shows the question, the framing is not, oh, they're all bankrupt, let's close them. It's how do we save these hospitals and have an efficient, effective system of healthcare? Because, primary care is what we need to be tackling the most. It's the same thing about childcare. It's the same thing in everything. Prevention, a stitch in time saves 9. It's the same concept. You know what I mean? Like we cannot cut. And then what do we have? It's the same idea where we get into that death spiral, which I believe we're in right now. So you have to cut into the growth and then you start having more housing. That's why we could probably move to that next. So more housing so humans can actually live here to do the services. You keep your hospital open so people can actually stay in the town. More taxpayers in the schools. The property taxes come down. More houses, the grand list, the property taxes come down. It's these root causes that push us. So, it's funny. I think a lot about this. The trope is the Republicans want to cut, the Democrats want to tax and spend. Sorry, folks. We got to grow our way out of this structural challenge in Vermont, and it affects healthcare, education, our hospitals, the whole 9 yards.
Well, I'm glad you put it that way because I've been wondering why a young family would want to move to particularly rural Vermont. Chittenden County, where we are, seems to be doing pretty well, but it's the rest of Vermont. What's the motivation for a family with children to move somewhere where the school might close and they're a long way away from a hospital?
Bingo. What is the motivation, Mark? Are we going to give up on Vermont? Or are we going to decide we can innovate? We have everything we need here. This is what's amazing. We have everything we need. We do have amazing programs. We have amazing services. We have incredible leadership in communities. We have great innovation. We have all this great problem solving. So the question is, no, a family won't do that. And so what is the flip side? How about we corner the market on childcare? Because you're looking for a beautiful place in this crazy world we live in that actually cares about community still. Back to my whole reason to run home to Vermont. We pull each other out of the ditch. Freedom and unity is a beautiful thing when you get that balance right of those two contradicting forces. Live your life, but pitch in for your neighbor. This is a value that not many places share right now. We corner the market on that. We corner the market on childcare. So if we go into this growth mindset, I'm seeing amazing things. I was in Guildhall, Vermont the other day, okay? It's a tiny town. What did I see at this little house party? My friend who moved from Connecticut. It's funny. It just happens I knew her in Connecticut. She moved to Vermont with her family, her 2 young kids. They've reclaimed a 250-year-old farmstead from disrepair, totally rebuilt it. They're doing regenerative farming. And all the people there, including many people, I went to Oxbow High School. I didn't realize they went back to the land from Newberry up to Guildhall, right up the Connecticut River and remote to remoter. And they are building a beautiful community in Guildhall together. And they're making it work. They're bringing the jobs by creating the regenerative farming. They have CSAs. They have these farm stands. They're creating the jobs. They're working remotely. They've come with great big jobs in other parts of the world that they've been able to stay. And they literally said, we've just invested in this community. We're ready to do this. It works. But it don't work if that hospital closes. And it really doesn't work if our schools close / we actually can't send our kids to the schools who exist in this area because we've closed all our other schools. Okay. So we can't do that. That's the bottom line.
Should Vermonters be worried that the University of Vermont Medical Center is quote unquote losing $400,000 a day?
Yes. So I think we've squeezed. We've started to right the ship and we've got to the inflection point. That's what that's showing. Okay. We need UVMMC to be successful. We need our hospitals to be successful. We have great things starting to come down the pike, right? Leadership, both at Blue Cross Blue Shield and at the system with Steve. We have this $195 million. We have this urgency where we're all working together. We have reference-based pricing, right? We have to become more efficient and keep costs low. That will be a governor on the cost. Like the foundation formula will be a governor on the education costs. We do need these things, Mark. But you have to make sure you have a long view so you're not destroying the system while you transform it, right? Like that's why, remember, childcare, people, policy, programs, we did all three in unison. So we did not destroy the system while we were transforming it. That's why I'm a little worried we don't have all of our ducks in the row. A plan, a vision for the state so that it doesn't come in fits and starts from the Green Mountain Care Board a little bit because there's a vacuum, from hospitals themselves a little bit because there's a vacuum, from the legislature. No, I'm sorry. These pieces have to work together and the vision has to come from the top. And that's what I'm worried about. We're accidentally squeezing too hard where we'll punch a hole in our system that we rely on that we can't come back from, Mark. And that's really, what is costly when you actually squeeze too hard and then you have to rebuild. That's much more expensive.
And everybody goes to the emergency room, which is the most expensive place to go. But,
Exactly.
400 million, or the numbers that we're talking about, that's hemorrhaging. I mean, that's not just a slow trickle.
Exactly. And it's amazing. You see with the drivers, its utilization is down, which hasn't happened ever. People are just choosing to not go in for the care that they need, so another symptom of fear, of changes, dysfunction in Washington, all the above. So I think we need to, it is hemorrhaging, and, I trust the leaders with the plan, never waste a good emergency. These crises will force, the efficiencies and the innovation. And there's amazing things happening right now. I left a work group between Mike Smith and the Green Mountain Care Board in the hospital, also resigned from it to run. And we were all working together with the same goals. And we had this great report for clinical efficiency at the hospital, which can save real money, start turning the tide on things that will stop this sort of hemorrhaging. Everyone was agreed. By the way, that's what is amazing. When we all sat down and said, what are our goals? We had the same goal. It's not like us versus them.
Is the Green Mountain Care Board squeezing too hard?
I'd like to see more of a high-level plan with some collective values. We lost a planning, healthcare vision and planning function out of AHS that never was recreated. We're missing a strategic planning arm for healthcare vision. And the Green Mountain Care Board, I think, is in a vacuum trying, but as a regulator, not their job. And that's not right to have both functions be there. So I think it's just not, it's back to that toothpaste tube. We don't know when we squeeze it what comes out the other end. That's what I'm most worried about. We just don't have one vision that ties the pieces together.
I don't know what you're referring to when you say the AHS plan. What do you mean
Blueprint
by that?
for Health. So we used to have, the Agency of Human Services used to do deep, long view healthcare vision and planning work that sort of got sucked into the single payer conversation. Then the Green Mountain Care Board was created out of that, which did not include the planning, and it shouldn't in the regulator, and that never sort of got replicated. So we don't have folks taking the long view, bringing the humans together on the most important issue in the state of Vermont, Mark, which we know, talk about the tentacles. What's the deal with healthcare, okay? 70,000 humans in the commercial insurance pool. That's not enough for a commercial insurance pool, okay? More needs, more complex needs, rural healthcare, harder, more expensive anyway. We're like the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the country on this. We are not unique. Strangling business because of the costs, which are, by the way, unstable. Not only are they huge, but they're also unstable. How can you plan for that as a business? So, and then perverse incentives crop out of that. So you're not paid to keep people healthy. And then, like you said, you go to the ER and everything starts going into that cycle. So healthcare is very broken, just to put a fine point on it. It should be the priority of state government to understand the moving pieces and to put all the players together on the strategic plan.
Are you assuming that Phil Scott's going to run?
I am.
How do you beat somebody with 70% popularity? Approval
Look,
ratings.
A couple of things on this. it's a funny thing to say, but it's no disrespect to Phil. Thank you for your service. Okay. 10 years. It is not working, Mark, right now. This is not working. As I mentioned, 10 years focused on childcare. I pick my head up. We've done something huge, had to override a veto with bipartisan support. I just need to mention this. All the Dems, all the progs, a bunch of Republicans, a bunch of independents, and the sole libertarian came together for the vote and the override. This is not some partisan experiment. So working on that for 10 years in that way, seeing it work, picking my head up. The New York Times was here to celebrate Vermont's progress. They did this amazing piece, 4 minutes video.
Yeah, I've seen it.
So they summarized the 10-year effort, Mark. And you know why they did it? Because they said, who's actually done something about affordability in this country? Their answer was, childcare in Vermont. They've demonstrably made it more affordable for humans with kids. And that's why they came up to do that. It was part of my decision making of running when I was being interviewed for that, the same time that there's no discussion of childcare. We're not hearing the governor sing it from the bully pulpit, celebrate it, have people come to Vermont, get people excited about it. So, for me, when I pick my head up and see that literally everything else is on fire, it's not working. We have to admit it. So 10 years, thank you very much. Managed us through COVID. It is time for a new approach. I think Vermonters understand that. We don't have term limits, but 12 years would be an experiment. It would be the longest we've ever seen, Mark. That's one thing. And I also think that there's a hope and change moment. These things, talk back to my American history grounding, these things are cyclical. They rhyme. And I'm seeing a hope and change mood in this country, and heaven knows we need it. And I think that's coming home to Vermont too.
Do you think Vermonters worry that because of the dominance of the Democrats in the legislature, that Phil Scott presents himself as a check on that? Do you think that?
I do think that. I think Vermonters like a divided government for that reason, Mark. Here's what I'll have to offer. I will also be a check to these things, because I will lay out a vision. And I will say, this is the state economic development plan. These are how the things touch each other. If this idea might be great, but if it's not in the vision, or if it contradicts the path we're on as a state to literally button us up, that's what I'm doing, Mark. I'm running to put Vermont on a stable path, structurally, stabilize ourselves. I do not believe we are. That's why I'm running now too. I don't think we have 2 more years to experiment on whether this failed approach is working. So I do think Vermont wants a divided government. And I think a moderate Democrat has a much better chance at delivering, because the difference is, yes, thank you for being sort of like a goalie, swatting things away. Actually, we need a strategic offense. You can still be, a support in that way. But let's be honest, the legislature is part-time volunteers without a staff. They need good bones to work with, a starting point to work with. Then they can do their deliberation. They can do their deep dives. They can be the feedback loop with the constituents. They can be data. They can be oversight. They can be accountability. But don't ask that structure to make long-term systemic change. They're 1-year budget cycles, 2-year election cycles. No, it doesn't work without a vision or a staff, and that staff is the administration. So that's the difference. Thank you for your service. I will also be a ballast, but I will provide a strategic offense, a vision that will, I think, focus the legislature up as the balance should be.
Give me a minute or two on housing.
It's my number one issue because of everything we talk. Housing and healthcare.
I mean, I don't know anybody that can, particularly a younger generation, how they can afford a house.
They can't. And there's none of them. And there's no mobility in the market. Look, I live in Montpelier. There's a downsizing club of all my neighbors who are so desperate to get out of their drafty old homes. They don't need the space. They would like to let a young family live there. And they would like a turnkey condo. So we've agreed at 30,000 housing units, Mark. We've agreed. Rural caucus, the governor, let's build homes. We've agreed. It's this root cause, like we talked about earlier. We're building 1,200 a year. Okay, so why? There's so much things we have to do. We have to build. We have to stop losing the housing while we build. I mean, really, we spent like $800 million building housing, 5,000 units. At the same time, 5,000 units became Airbnbs. Okay. So stop the transfer, create the new stock, be smart about it. Wake Robin has a 15-year wait list. The one in Montpelier does too. There's an absolute demand for folks to have these, different living arrangements. It creates the mobility in the market. It'll bring down the cost, and we know it's needed. So every single barrier, what is it? Systematically get through them. Invest in Vermont Task Force, sprint, every single one. And, it's regulatory, it's access to capital, and it's supply chain issues. What I do is look at what works and say more of that. I just saw Bennington High. You cut me off because you said a couple minutes, but, I'll just quickly tell you, Bennington High, amazing. 1913 building, beautiful building in the middle of downtown Brattleboro, sitting fallow. It took entrepreneurial spirit like I've never seen before, frankly, genius level work and Herculean effort to do this project. And it's beautiful. 39 housing units, mixed housing, a childcare center, a gym, a conference room, an auditorium. It's perfect. It's so good for Bennington. It's so great for the needs of the community. How the heck do they do it? So that's why I asked. I got this amazing tour and I said, how did you do it? They basically said, we would have, if anything would have gone wrong, if we couldn't get through any of the million barriers that came our way, we'd have to literally declare bankruptcy. So no one can take that risk on. We're not getting, only the people that can take the risk, not building the right housing. So you have to address that. And then I said, so who are the people that understand you navigated new market tax credits, low income tax credits, brownfields? He's like, well, this guy understands it and this person understands it. Great. Let's get them to become the navigators for every town and get them to train 5 more of them, 10 more of them. And that's the state government's job. Send those people out to all the communities to say, this is how you navigate CHIP. Great new program. We're not using it nearly enough yet. Here's the new market tax credits. Navigate the complex system so we really can deliver.
What do you think the biggest barrier is to you winning?
No one's asked me that before. The biggest barrier to me winning. I think the biggest barrier is just the amount of time I have to meet Vermonters and let them know where my heart and my head are at, what my experience is, and why I will not stop until I see a result on the ground. I don't care who you are, what your party is. I will talk to anyone and everyone I want to. Bring the humans together to the solution. I think when people see me, know me, learn to trust me, and have seen my track record, they get there, because it's true. Back to what we said, put it in Twin Mom. We got to roll up our sleeves and do this work here. Do I have enough time to make my case to all of Vermont, so they can know me and know where my head and my heart at, where my true motivation is? I was not sitting at home, Mark, plotting when I could run for governor. I literally, started getting approached and thought, who am I kidding? I'm a racehorse. 5-alarm fire. I gotta roll up my sleeves. If I can posit a positive vision for Vermont, it will be worth it.
That wraps it up for this edition of 802 News, brought to you by Red Hen Baking Company. Thanks for listening.